Menachos Bais, I believe, right? Yeah. So 68b. It says over here a mnemonic for the following 4 questions that Rabbi is going to ask. Rabbi is a 3rd generation. He's in the same time as Rava. He married Rav Chisda's daughter as well. Seder, Hinsa, Gali, Pil, Simon. Okay. So it's maybe 18 lines from the bottom. Boy Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama asks a question. Shtei alechem. 2 bread. Shvuos. Ma'oshi yatiru shleika sidjan. What's the din? Can they be matir the new grain for the Mizbeach? Shleika sidjan. Shleika sidjan means that we have 2 things that are matir the grain. The first is the Omer. That's brought on Pesach, second day of Pesach. And the Omer allows the grain to be eaten by all the people. Then we have the Shtei Alechem that allows the grain to be eaten, to be used for a korban.
Shtei Alechem is brought when?
Shtei Alechem is brought on Shavuos.
Okay.
And that allows the new grain to be brought on the Mizbeach. The
So
Menachem.
between Pesach and Shavuos, new grain can't be brought in, only to the people.
The people can eat it, but the Mizbeach there's no heter to the Mizbeach until the Shtei Alechem. So yesterday we were learning this discussion with Yehuda Menachem and Reb Tarfon, and we were discussing if the Omer diminishes if there's 2 steps to the process of allowing the grain. Is it the Omer and then the Shtei Alechem, or is it the Shtei Alechem does the whole thing? That was the discussion. We're continuing that question, sort of, in Rami Bar Chama's
what's the question?
This question is, can the Shtei Alechem be matir without the Omer beforehand? He's going to explain. Hey Chidami, what's the scenario? Kegoin, for example, the Zarino ben ha'Omer l'Shtei Alechem. It was planted in Iyar, which is the middle of the Sphira, before Shavuos, after Pesach, before Shavuos. V'chol ha'falai Shtei Alechem. He brought the Shtei Alechem. So there was no Omer, but there's a Shtei Alechem. V'Omer. And then the Omer comes the following year. Okay? Now we're back in Iyar, or we're back at the end of Nisan with this grain. My Kisidron Shayin. Is it only matir the grain in order, and therefore the Omer here came after the Shtei Alechem, which was out of order, and you can't bring this grain on the Mizbeach. Shlei Kisidron Lai Shayin, and it doesn't permit it out of order. Dilma Shlei Kisidron Nami Shayin, and maybe it also allows it out of order. See, in our discussion before, we wouldn't have asked it like this. We would have asked, does the Shtei Alechem do the whole thing? Or is it a combination of Omer and Shtei Alechem? For whatever reason, he's not asking it like that. He needs the Omer. He's accepting that fact that he needs the Omer. Who holds that you need the Omer? That was Yehuda ben Nechemia. He held that the Omer is part of the process. Remember that? That's how we explained it yesterday.
But if you say Shlei Kisidron Namashayan, that means that the Omer is not relevant.
No. Shlei Kisidron Namishayan means that I still need the Omer. I just don't need the Omer to be beforehand. What would happen if the Shtei Alechem was planted in Iyar? I can eat it, or I can already bring it in on Ches Sivan. We're not saying that. We're saying I can bring it after the following Pesach on the Mizbeach, after the Omer, but before the next Shtei Alechem. See, it's still Shlei Kisidron. It still is Shtei Alechem and the Omer. It's not just Shtei Alechem, right?
If you
Who
couldn't
would
bring
do
it,
that? You know?
if you couldn't bring it, you would have to wait another whole year.
A year.
Till after Chesh.
Yeah,
The
well,
next year.
the whole
He tried
question
to
here,
prove
the
power
whole
of
question,
God.
You're talking about 45 days.
No, yeah, exactly.
the whole question here is,
50 days.
yeah,
Sorry.
is it mutter right after Pesach or is it mutter the following after
No.
Shavuos,
You mean is a mutter after
the
okay.
following year? So it's a difference of
50 days.
Yeah, 50 days.
49?
Okay. Now, just the interesting thing is that we're following Yehuda ben Nechemiah's view of yesterday, which Yehuda ben Nechemiah we sort of didn't really accept. We didn't accept his character, but his view was it must have been it was accepted, and we're continuing that. Amar Rabba Tashma Rabba says, "Come and listen." It's going to bring a proof. Proof goes like this. Vim takriv minchas bikurim. When you will bring the offering, we're talking about the Eimer. V'minchas Eimer akasim medaber. Pasuk is talking about the Eimer. V'heichan ba, where does it come from? It's interesting. The Pasuk doesn't say that it comes from the barley. It says Menachem comes from barley. Ata Eimer Menachem, you say that it's barley. Maybe it's not so. Maybe it comes from the wheat. How do you know it's barley? The pasuk says, "Aviv koli be'esh geras karmel takravis minchas bekurecha." It doesn't say barley. So we need to prove that the omer is brought from barley. The alechem is brought from wheat. The omer is brought from barley. So Rabbi Eliezer omer. We start with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkenes, Rabbi Eliezer Agabel. He says, "Nemar aviv b'Mitzrayim, v'nemar aviv l'doros." When it came to the hail in the plagues, it says that the hail broke. The hail broke the barley, but not the wheat, because the wheat wasn't full yet, so it didn't break it. So it talks about the barley there. It says, "Ki hasa'ira," I forget. "Hapishtav hasa'ira nukasa, ki hasa'ira aviv." The flax and the barley was smitten because the barley was ripe. So it uses the word aviv, which it was already strong, and therefore it cracked. So, and it says aviv by the Karbanaimer. Ma aviv am b'Mitzrayim sa'irim. Just like it's clear that aviv in Egypt means barley. It's also teaches me that the aviv that it says about the carbon aviv means ripened. That when it says ripened, it's referring to barley. We learn it from what it says somewhere else, and in that context, it meant barley. We'll explain it here also that it's barley, and therefore the carbon aimer, which is brought on the second day of Shavuos, is barley. It's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Rabbi Kiva aimer. Bikiva says, "Matzini yachid shemei b'chevas yichitin, v'chevas asayrin." We find that an individual brings a sacrifice, an obligatory sacrifice from wheat. We find that he brings barley. The wheat one is the sin offering; it's an obligatory offering, and the barley one is the saita offering. She brings barley. B'tzibur, we also find the community. Shemevi and chevasim menachitin, and maybe and chevasim menasayrim. And so too, the community needs to have a wheat and a barley. What would be the wheat? Well, the wheat could be any of the nesachim.
What's the source for this matzino? Rabbi Kiva says matzino, is that like a...
Yeah, that's a good question. No, but... Yeah,
he's making a statement. Where's the statement coming from?
Well,
it's Rabbi Kiva, of course.
Is he doing this? I guess you're right. I guess he wants to do a mamatzino. He's doing a comparison. That just like we find by an individual, that he has
But this
a
rule
barley
that
and
he's
wheat.
establishing, where does this rule come from?
Oh, a mamatzino is like a binyan av. In Rabbi Shmuel Eimer, he calls it a binyan av. That binyan av means it's an example that from that we compare that to other things. And so the tzibur brings also from the wheat, and they also bring from barley. And if you're going to say that the Eimer ba menachitin, then you're not going to have a barley offering for the community, and then it's not going to be comparable to the individual. Davar acher, another interpretation. And this is the one that we need. The next answer is the big deal. Another interpretation is, another explanation, why, how do we know that it's barley? Imata Omer, if you're going to say, Omer ba menachitin, that it comes from wheat, then ein shtei alechem bikurim. Then the shtei alechem won't be the first offering.
Right.
The first offering on of the new grain would have been already on the mizbeach, would have already been the new offering of wheat would have been on the Omer 50 days before the shtei alechem. Shtei alechem is supposed to be bikurim, the first one. Now watch this. Now this is going to prove the Rami Bar Chama's question. It's going to give us an answer to Rami. The Im Isa, and if we're going to accept Shtei Alechem Shleika Sidron Sharian, that the two loaves of bread that are brought out of that if it's that they allow the new grain, they permit the new grain out of order. That means something that was planted in Iyar after the Omer becomes permitted after the two breads without the Omer beforehand, preceding it. But even with the Omer afterwards, what will happen? Mishkachasla, it's possible. Demakar v'Omer mehanach dashus koydem l'shtei alechem. We'll bring the Omer from the grain that was planted before the shtei alechem in Iyar. We'll wait 11 months. We'll bring the Omer, which is brought in Nisan, from the grain that was planted in Iyar the previous year, 11 months prior. The Shita Mikobetzes takes out the following words. Ushtei alechem, we jump 3 words. Mehanach da'ashus koydem la'omer. And then we'll bring the shtei alechem on Shavuos from the ones that were planted before the Omer. We're bringing the Omer mehanach da'ashus koydem l'shtei alechem. Shtei alechem mehanach da'ashus koydem la'omer. Dahashta ubasar shtei alechem de'ishtaket. And then we'll bring the shtei alechem. We'll bring the shtei alechem from the grain that was planted in Tammuz. Mm-hmm. So, what we're doing is we're having the Omer from before the Omer grain is being brought from the grain that was planted before the shtei alechem. The shtei alechem grain is going to be brought from the ones that was planted after the shtei alechem. So it's real bikurim, even though it's not before the Omer. Both of them came from after the Omer, but they're both wheat, and we could have 2 offerings of wheat, and one of them is bikurim, and they're both actually from the new crop. They're both after last year's Omer. Mm-hmm. One was planted in Iyar, one was planted in Tammuz. How could we call the second one the new crop? Because it was planted after the shtei alechem. It was never permitted to the mizbeach. So the Gemara answers like this: Mi savris, do you think? In other words, right here, the proof would have been, if we would stop right there, the proof would have been is that it's impossible to say that it's mater shleika sidron. Because if it's mater shleika sidron, if the shtei alechem works out of order, then Rabbi Akiva loses his proof. His proof that the Omer is barley is because the shtei alechem needs to be brought from the new crop. And if the Omer was wheat, then it wouldn't be the new crop. So we said, well, if you accept that the shtei alechem permits out of order, we're able to get the new crop as well from wheat, even if the Omer would be wheat. It must be that the shtei alechem can't permit out of order.
You say out of order, what do you mean out of order?
Out of order would mean that if I plant the grain in Iyar, that means the Omer was not mater. But the shtei alechem is mater, out of order, not Omer shtei alechem, but shtei alechem, and then I wait for the following Omer. So then shtei alechem Omer, and then it becomes permissible. So then I'm able to get one bikurim, one like first offering of wheat would have been the one that was planted before the Shtei Alechem,
Right.
and then I would bring it as the Aimer, and then I would bring the one that was after the Shtei Alechem as the next Shtei Alechem. So the Shtei Alechem would have been the demarcation of what's considered new. Now, if that's the case, then I'm able to get two crops, two new offerings. So the Gemara says, "Mi sabes bikurim lepeira kamrinan." Do you think that the Shtei Alechem is bikurim for the fruits? Lemizbeach kamrinan. V'achal lemizbeach miperi dahayshat. It's not going to help, because the fact is that that's still considered the new grain, and so therefore the oimer that you brought from this year's crop was the first. Well, and if it's wheat, then that was the first offering, and then the even though the next one was planted after the Shtei Alechem, and the Shtei Alechem is bikurim, but the Shtei Alechem is not going to change. It's not even though it's planted after, and you never had anything brought on the mizbeach from after the Shtei Alechem. But the fact is that the altar already had from the new crop, and we said that the Shtei Alechem is bikurim, the first, and you didn't resolve that.
It's absolutely first.
It has to be absolutely the first, right? Okay, that was his first question, and we didn't have an answer to it. Boy Rami Bar Chama, Shtei Alechem. Rami Bar Chama's second question.
To what?
To if the Shtei Alechem is mater before.
Seer? No, not the Seer.
Out of order, or not. We thought we had an answer, because if you're going to say that it works out of order, then we would be able to bring the.
I mean, the Kohen would be so mubal.
Once again,
But
so then you
according
can
to
bring
this,
the lechem hana before.
you can't do that in order.
Well, you can't bring the lechem.
No, what
hana
happened
Well,
was-
it's a good exercise in the how you stretch time and issues, but
Doesn't that prove that?
What happened was we brought an answer, and then we said that the answer is no good, so it left us without an answer. We brought an answer that you can't say that it works out of order, because then Rabbi Akiva's reasoning doesn't work. We said no, Rabbi Akiva's reasoning would still work even if it worked out of order, because it would not be the first bikurim, and so therefore the Omer needs to be barley. Okay. Boy Ram Bar Chama. This is a brand new question. If it was confusing, so we start over.
no, they work there.
Shtei Alechem. The two loaves of Shavuos. Hanatza Sharia, Eichanata Sharia. When it's mater, the new grain, what's considered the new grain? Does it have to be that the grain has already budded? Okay, let me tell you the two stages here. One is, you see, it flowers. So when the flower falls off, so it leaves under it this tiny bulge in the that's the beginning of the fruit. So, but it's not really like a round ball yet. You wait a little bit, and it turns round, and you actually can tell that this is a fruit. So the first is the flowering, the hanatza. But if we're talking about that the flower is already falling off, what chanata is it shapes into a fruit. It's tiny, but it's already shaped. And we're talking about that the Shtei Alechem permits the new fruits, let's say the bikurim, to be brought, or it allows the grain to be brought onto the new grain to be brought as a mincha. So, which one is it? So the Gemara asks, "My hanatza, my chanata." Which? What's the English for hanatza? Blossoming is probably, and chanata means. Do you have an English word of it?
Form. It's form.
You have an English word in the art scroll.
No, they say it in Hebrew.
Oh, excellent. Okay, so we're in the same boat. My hanatza, my chanata. What's hanatza and what's chanata? Eily ma hanatza de peri v'chanata de peri. If we say we're talking about the fruit, the way that I just explained it. So hashta. Hashrosh Sharia, Hanatza v'Chanata mibai. We learned a different demarcation here. we learned that you plant the grain in the ground. You plant the seeds in the ground. Did the seeds take root? If the seeds take root, when it came to the Omer, we said that when you bring the Omer, the new grain is permissible. You can eat from the new crops. Before the Omer, you can't eat from the new crops. So when you bring the Omer, you can eat from the new crops. What's considered the new crop? Already what you have in the house? No. He said the new crop was anything that was planted in the ground and already took root. That means it started to sprout downward in the ground. If it took root already, which takes like 3 days, I think, for a seed to take root. So, at least in Hilchot Shabbos. So the Omer allows that. Even you look at the field, you don't see anything above ground. The Omer already permitted that. So now you have a question if the Shtei Alechem is going to permit the fruit, if the blossom fell off, or if it's so far after what the Omer allowed, and it should be symmetrical to what the Omer and the Shtei Alechem, what they're permitting. So why are you asking this question if it permits it even when you don't see any stalks in it? It permits it even when it's planted in the ground and it hasn't even sprouted upwards.
Nobody planted at that time.
It
has to go to the season. There's no rain. The whole planting goes according to the seasons. It's no planted after Nisan. You have to have your mind. It's like throwing your grain away. I'm sorry. There won't be anything happening. This makes everyone in the whole country very strong to have rain out of season.
When we're discussing the Shtei Alechem, so it does more than just grain. It also allows the fruits, the bikurim, to be brought.
Okay.
And
It's
the
not
bikurim, it's not just grain. By the
trees.
Omer, it's just grain,
Trees.
right?
Yeah, right.
By the Omer, it's just for grain.
Right.
And for the Shtei Alechem, it's allowing more than the grain. The new grapes to be brought as Nesachim, and the bikurim to be brought.
Can you
There are no grapes then. The grapes have been finished already by around Sukkot.
Yeah. So now our question is, if it started to blossom earlier, does the Shtei Alechem allow that? Does it permit it? Right? Now we're asking, why are you asking if it started to blossom? It has to do with what takes root. Well, the truth is for fruits, the trees are there. So if we're dealing with fruits, it's a little different.
Sounds like you might have grown something in Eretz Yisrael.
So what are the two maters? The mater of what's it called?
The
Omer is mater is grain
for
right?
everyone to eat.
And then so the mater of the Shtei Lechem is mater bikurim and
It's
all
matir,
fruits.
all the fruits and the grain for the temple use.
Right, but the grain, but that's only for the mizbeach. But
Right.
prior to that, personal use is all.
Then
Right,
for
okay,
personal
okay.
use, you're always allowed to use the fruits.
Okay.
There's no.
Right.
So the Gemara says, "Ela hanatza da'ala v'chanata da'ala." We're talking about the new leaves. We're not talking about the new fruits. We're talking about the new leaves, which is even prior to the fruits, preceding the fruits. Mihavi ki hashrasha Eily. Do we say that the new leaves is like the grain taking root? And if there's new leaves already, then the Shtei Alechem allows it, or not? Or do we say that's not considered that it's like the grain took root?
He wants to eat the leaves.
I didn't understand it like that. I understood that he wants to eat the fruit, and not eat the fruit. He wants to bring the fruit or the grapes or the wine on, as bikurim or whatever, or the wine as the nesachim. The question is, did the Shtei Alechem permit this? We said, well, we didn't see anything when the Shtei Alechem was brought. It wasn't there yet. You said, well, you did because you saw the new leaves. Is that considered like it took root? Teku. We don't have an answer. Okay, now we have some questions that are in between Rami Bar Chama's questions, but similar type issues. Boy Rava Bar Rav Chanan. I believe Rava Bar Rav Chanan is a son-in-law of Rav. Chitin shazarim bekarka. Let's say you plant wheat in the ground. So Omer matiran ayin Omer matiran. Does the Omer permit it? Gemara is a little bit surprised by this question. It says, "Hey Chidami, what's your case? You put wheat in the ground. Ida ashras. If it took root, Tanina. That's what the Mishnah says. That if it takes root, the Omer permits it. Idalay Ashers, if it didn't take root, Tanina. That we also learned in the Mishnah. Ditanan, what does the Mishnah say? Imeshrishu kaidem la'Omer, Omer matiran. If it took root before the Omer permits it. Ve'im lav asurin. Achiyave Omer haba. You have to wait an entire year. So what's your question? You put grain in the ground. Does the Omer permit it? But there's a follow-up question. That is, did it take root? Gemara says, late tzricha. No, it's not necessary to discuss it like that. It's actually necessary to ask this question. The chatzdinu, where he harvested the grain, is arinu kaidem la'Omer, and he planted it before the Omer. Va'asa Omer b'chalaf alayim. Now the Omer passed. Okay. And his question is, Mahu l'nekute umechal minayo. Can you go and can you take the seeds out of the ground? So it was planted before the Omer. If you would wait for it to sprout, if you would wait for it to grow new grain, so then it would be permissible.
What do you mean? If it's already
If
rooted,
it was, if it took root, then it would be permissible.
Right.
But here,
Took the grain just to eat them?
he takes the grain. He sowed it in the ground, but now he decides he wants to eat the grains.
They're hunting in the earth to look for grains.
Corn nuts.
Well, actually, we're not discussing if it would have sprouted. What we're discussing is if he never would have planted it. He never would have planted it. So the Omer passed, and the Omer passed.
Maybe he changed his mind.
Right.
He planted them. They didn't take root. And then
Right.
he regrets that he planted them, and he doesn't want to wait another year. So he says, "I'm
Right.
going to eat the seeds. Take them out of the ground."
Right. So the Omer passed and permits this grain. The Omer permitted this grain. The problem is that you put it back in the ground to plant it again. And if you're going to allow if you want it to grow, you're going to have to wait for the new Omer. But
What's happening again? What's chronologically? What's going on?
what happened is he harvests the grain before the Omer's brought.
Okay.
And now the Omer was supposed to permit it.
Right.
But instead of waiting it, letting the grain sit, and the Omer would permit this grain and he could eat it,
Right.
he takes the grain and he puts it back in the ground, and then they bring the Omer.
He replants them.
He replants them, and the Omer is brought when it's in the ground. So now, if this grain, is this grain going to be part of?
It was permitted.
It was permitted.
Once it's permitted,
It would have been permitted if it was out of the ground, but now he planted it.
Puts it back in.
No, he planted it, and now it really requires the following year's Omer. That would be the issue. It really requires the following year's Omer. So do we say, command the Shadya Bekadya Damya? Do we say that the earth is holding it in a bucket, and when the Omer is brought, it permits the grain? Visharino Omer, and the Omer allows it. Or do we say that it's part of the ground, and the Omer never permitted this? That's what's in the ground.
Unless it took root.
Unless it took root, unless it took root, and in this instance, you would have to wait for the following Omer. And Rava Bar Chanan continues this question with, there's other aspects to this also. The first question was, can you pull it out and eat it? Did the Omer permit it? But there's also another question. Yesh lehem aynah, ein lehem aynah. We have a rule that if someone gets overcharged a certain amount, so the sale becomes invalid. It's called aynah. Aynah is like to oppress. So what's the amount of being overcharged? It's 1/6 of the value. So we have a rule that when it comes to property, when it comes to land, there's no such thing as aynah. Even if the person is overcharged, the sale is still valid. And I bought my house here, so it was overpriced. So I asked Reb Chaim, texted him. He said, should I buy it? He texted me back, the value will come in. So that's why I'm here. by property, the value will come in. There's no such thing as being overcharged. The value,
Catch up.
yeah. So that's the halacha. If someone overcharges for a property, you can't say, "Oh, I was overcharged." It's the whole mekach tos. The sale is invalid. No, it's not, that's how it works. So now I have grain that's in the ground, and there's a sale that takes place. Do I say that the grain is considered property? Or do I say that the grain is grain? What's the difference? If it's grain, then there's going to be, the sale is possibly invalid if there was some sort of overcharging here. But if it's property, then there's no inah. So the Gemara asks, hey chidami, what's the story? Eily medam alei, if we say that the case is shadi bashita, I put into the grain 6 measurements. I put into the ground 6 measurements of grain. That's what someone's buying the field. And the previous owner says, I planted in it 6 measurements of grain. Basusadi, the witnesses come. Amri, and they tell the buyer, he only put in 5 measurements of grain. So he was overcharged 1/6. Because he claims that there was a 6th more that was put in. The Gemara asks, that can't be the case. This doesn't have to do with Einah. This has to do with the liar. If there's a measurement here, anything that's measured, you can't, look, you buy a dozen eggs and it's missing 1, so it's not a 6. You say, okay, the sale's not, it's not invalid. That's not how it works. You had a certain amount. You can't just say, oh, it's less than the amount. He says, I planted what is fit to be planted, what's required for such a field. So now we take away the number of it. So it's just like an estimation. So there's no number there. So no number there, then we could say that maybe it's land and there's no ainah. See, even when it comes to land, if you say I'm selling you a certain amount of acres or something, and it's not the right amount, but because you're using a number, you're using a measurement, you can't say there's no ainah in that. So, yesh lam ainah, the command of shadi bekadadami. Do we say it's ainah? There is ainah by this grain because it's considered like the grain is held in a bucket, and it's not considered part of the land. Yesh lam ainah. Idilma batlu l'gabayara. Or is it part of the ground? It's not considered movable objects. Next part of his question. We have a rule that ein nishban al karkais, if it ends up in court, you don't swear on land. You don't swear. The litigants can't swear to prove their point when it comes to land or when it comes to avadim. The Gemara learns this, I think, from Sukkim. Nishban aleim ayin nishban aleim. Could they swear on it or did they not swear on this, on the grain? Do we say it's like movable objects?